Hey there, I'm Brian, founder of the Grief for Growth community. If you're navigating loss and seeking a place of healing, connection, and growth, we're here for you. Join us to explore life, death, and everything in between. Together, we'll find hope, strength, and the tools to keep moving forward. Visit grieftogrowth.com. That's grief, the numeral two, growth.com/community, and join for free. I hope to see you inside. Have a great day. And now, onto the podcast.
And I think one thing I learned too, between the two of us when our son died, is you have to respect each other's grief. I didn't go into Eric's room for 3 years. I couldn't even breathe. We didn't change his room. We had to just respect each other's wishes and to adjust to each other and respect each other and not blame each other and move forward together so that our marriage was, and many times families fall apart, especially with the suicide. We really focused on helping each other get through the experience together. And that was very important.
Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hi there, welcome to Grief to Growth. This is the podcast where we explore life's most challenging journeys to help you find meaning, healing, and purpose. I'm your host, Brian Smith, and whether you're tuning in for the first time or whether you're a longtime listener, I want to thank you for being here and say welcome. Today, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Kimberly Harms, a remarkable woman whose life experiences make her uniquely insightful about both the pain of loss and the healing power of resilience. You know, here at Grief for Growth, we talk about how we can go from grief to growth, and we talk about the different griefs that we have, and Dr. Harms has been through many, and we'll talk about those today. Now, she's worn many hats throughout her career and her personal life as a clinical dentist, a public health service officer, a grief counselor, a death doula, and a dedicated mother and grandmother. She's also an international speaker, the best-selling author of Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For, and a soon-to-be published workbook, Naomi and the Widows Club, which supports those rebuilding their lives after the loss of a spouse. Dr. Harms, as I mentioned earlier, has endured profound personal loss herself, including the passing of her husband and two close family members to suicide. Yet her journey has transformed her into a guide for others, how others that are navigating widowhood, legacy, and grief. And today we'll explore how Dr. Harms finds joy in painful times, uncovers peace in uncertainty, and forges purpose even when life takes an unexpected turn. During our conversation, we'll dive into critical questions like how can you build a life and legacy worth living for? What does it take to feel peace in a world that often feels chaotic? And maybe more importantly, how can you find your own safe, strong place after experiencing deep personal loss? So be sure to stick around for this conversation. It promises to be a fascinating one. And after it's over, be sure to join us at grieftogrowth.com/community to continue the conversation there. And with that, I want to welcome Dr. Kim Harms.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's just wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. As I said, the title of the podcast is Grief to Growth, and it sounds like you've experienced your share of grief, and you're also making transformation and going through some positive things as we're talking. And we were talking just before we start recording, you were talking about the legacy of your grandchildren, and you just got a smile on your face and talk about how you're going to continue to build that legacy, even after all the things you've gone through. And I know you experienced some very personal, deep losses of people around you. And I'd just like to ask you to start with wherever you'd like and explain to us what happened.
Well, when I was born with I'm missing some fingers due to thalidomide. My mother took thalidomide when she was pregnant with me, and we didn't find out about that for about 6 years. And by that time, my parents had been divorced, and my father called my mother and said, "You know, it's those drugs that you took in Cincinnati. They were being tested that caused Kim to be missing her fingers." And at that moment, she'd had a complete breakdown. She had been having some issues before too, but she had a complete breakdown and went into a mental institution where she stayed for the rest of her life until I was 17 when she took her own life. Now, my mother obviously was fractured in many ways, but she was the best mother ever. She taught me that she loved me unconditionally. She gave me my faith, and I had at least 6 years with her that affected the rest of my life in a very positive way. So her
Mm.
loss was very dramatic for me. But I just want to make it clear that people that are mentally ill can be great parents. And she was absolutely the best thing that ever happened to me. And my ability, I think, to be resilient comes from her.
Hmm.
But I lost her when I was 17, which was just a terrible experience. I went on later, went to dental school, met this cute guy, Jim Harms, got married. Went to dental school together. We had in the public health service together, bought a practice, had the kind of a little small town in Farmington, Minnesota, and we had three beautiful children, and we were kind of living a good life. And I was thinking, maybe all the things I suffered as a child, my life's going to be good now, right? Well, as soon as
Yeah.
my Norwegian mother-in-law would say, don't think that way, but as soon as I did, things were going well. And one year in 2007, my brother died of a sudden heart attack. My husband Jim was diagnosed with liver cancer 1 month later,
Hmm.
and but luckily he had it was not a good prognosis, but then he miraculously got a liver transplant 6 months after that. We were on top of the world again. And then 6 months later, on January 31st of 2009, our wonderful son, Eric, who was a freshman at Columbia University, he'd been recruited by Columbia. He was just this brilliant kid.
Hmm.
And he went to Columbia, his dream school, because he could study engineering and play in the jazz band in New York City. I mean, like what he was a jazz pianist. He just loved it there. He was even elected to student government. Like, who gets elected to student government at Columbia? I mean, what the heck?
Wow.
The kid was on top of the world. He came home from his first semester and he was soaring. He was just soaring. He was so happy.
Hmm.
But just 2 weeks into his second semester, his girlfriend broke up with him, which is a normal experience in life.
Right.
And 45 minutes later, he was gone. He took
Wow.
his life in 45 minutes. And, those jazz pianists are very impulsive. That's what makes them great jazz pianists.
Um,
But he had an undeveloped brain, it wasn't fully developed, and was very impulsive. And bam, that was a fatal cocktail at that moment.
mhm.
That loss out of the blue completely shattered us to pieces.
Mm.
Anyone that's lost a child knows that it's undescribable where you go with that. But I had a gift that happened shortly after Eric died. I was getting back to work, and I was in that zombie phase. Anyone that's been at the bottom of the grief pit, just kind of sucking up a little, trying to get the mud out of your lungs, just trying to survive. I was in that zombie phase, kind of dead on the inside and kind of walking around trying to work and be out in society, again, which was hard,
Right.
a loss. And my husband was talking with his cousin, and very seriously. And I walked outside, and the cousin came up to me with anger in his voice and pain in his voice. And he pointed his finger right at my face and said, don't you ever let your remaining children feel that they are not enough. Don't you do that to them. And
Mm.
I I was taken aback because I realized that he had lost his brother at about the same age as Eric. And he felt that he lost his parents at the same time.
Oh, wow.
He felt that his parents couldn't attend to their living children because they
Mhm.
were consumed with grief over their dead one. And
Mhm.
I was headed in the same direction. I'm getting goosebumps now because I do every time I tell this story. I was
Yeah.
headed there. I could see. I was at the bottom of the grief pit, and I kind of felt, why get out? Because someone's going to get thrown back in again, right? You kind of get to that place when lots of things happen to you.
Sure.
And I realized at that moment, it was a defining moment for me because I realized that my grief doesn't just affect me, it affects everyone around me, including my living people that I love, my husband, who had just been through a liver transplant, my two daughters who were struggling with this death. We were a very close family.
Sure.
And I was resolved at that point to fight and kick and scream and like claw my way out of that pit because it takes work. You don't, if you don't fight it, you're going to just stay there, right? And that was a transforming thing for me. And eventually I worked my way out of the grief pit. It was hard. It was a lot of work. I fell down back in a couple of times, but I can now breathe fresh air and I can be there 100% for the people that are around me that I love, for the people that even
Mhm.
People I don't love, I can be there around them, 100%. And so that was really a defining moment. My husband, of course, I also got treated for depression. Very, very important because, look, I had a suicide on one side, a suicide on the other. Who's in the middle? Me. So I
Right.
went out and immediately got treated for depression. I do take some medication. I got off it for after a while because I thought, oh, I don't need this. And my children and my doctor said, get back on it right now. And I realized that this is something for me that I need treatment the rest of my life. And I've accepted it, just like I've accepted that I take my blood pressure medication every day. I take my medication for depression every day.
Hmm.
And it works. I've had no side effects. It works. It was one of the best decisions I made. My husband, unfortunately, who I believe was also depressed after the loss of our child,
Hmm.
did not seek care. I call him my stubborn Norwegian. He was a Norwegian farmer, and when he grew up, and they don't like to admit that they're strong. They don't like to admit that there's any weakness emotionally in them, and he struggled with that. And about a year after Eric died, Jim was in the hospital getting a quadruple bypass surgery and a valve replaced. Now, right before that, right before Eric died, before he had his transplant, his heart checked out great because they don't give you a liver if your heart's bad, right?
Mm.
So he had a heart that was well, and in about a year after Eric died, his
Mm.
heart was just destroyed. And eventually, after a long battle with what I call a broken heart, he did pass away a few years back, 4 years ago.
Mm.
And so I went through becoming a widow, where again, I've had to recreate my identity, which is part of grief, as a daughter, as a mother, and now as a widow where I'm now alone. I get up alone. If I go to the grocery store, nobody knows where I'm going. I mean, there's nobody there. It's a really tough transition as a widow.
Sure.
So what I learned to do is I learned at that point in time that I needed to just sit back and decide, okay, what's next? I'm between menopause and death, and I'm by myself. What am I going to do now, right? So I had some wonderful friends. I was involved in a beautiful widows grief group. And so I wrote a couple of books. I co-wrote two books on widowhood and the Christian devotionals for widowhood. And then
Hmm.
I thought we need a step-by-step plan to get through this part of life, to graduate from this part of life. So then I wrote my book, Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For, which is
Hmm.
designed to help prevent our children from going through the deep. It's like a preventive grief thing, so that they hopefully they won't go all the way down to the grief pit. I'm hoping for them to have a softer landing, and I think there are things we can do now to help our children have a softer landing when we go. And so that's my
Mm.
purpose now
Wow.
in developing purpose and having a new identity and understanding this is where I'm at now. What do I do now? All the plans I had for my retirement are up in smoke. None of them are what I thought they were, but I've got different plans now.
Right. 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 Well, we talked about a little bit before we got started. You do have different plans now, and I don't know where to begin. I'm so sorry for for your loss, all your losses. And as I was preparing for this, I was thinking about sometimes we compare grief, even though we know in the grief space we're not supposed to do that. And I'll never forget, I was talking with a woman one time, and I slipped, and I said, there's nothing worse than losing a child. And she said, "Oh, no, no, let me correct you. She had lost a son. She said, I've
Mm.
lost a son, and I just lost my spouse. Losing my spouse was much worse." Because and they're all different. You can't quantify it, but you've experienced all the
Oh,
losses we can think of, right? Sibling, child, mother. Uh, what's that been like for you in terms of each time? I guess you kind of reimagine who you are.
yeah, yeah. You fall into after before that one encounter, you would fall into that grief pit, and you'd kind of stay. I mean, I was like buying curtains, you're like, okay, I'm comfortable here. Let's just stay here and I'll be miserable the rest of my life.
Sure.
Because you can't imagine you'll ever smile again. And everyone who's been through grief knows you could walk outside and you see people living a normal life and you just want to go, hey, my husband just died. How can you be happy?
Right.
So I had to get through that. What I did is a year after Eric died, I also lost my identity as a dentist, and I was the primary breadwinner in my family because my husband was sick, right?
Mm.
1 year after Eric died, I was developing some real problems in my neck. And as it turned out, I had nerve damage. And of all places, my drilling fingers, my good fingers. I mean, I have a bad hand and a good hand. The good hand that was a working hand Now of all places to have nerve damage, it was in those
Oh,
three fingers. And so it was like, what the heck? And I was calling my pastor and I was in the phone just crying. I was coming back from the Mayo Clinic, like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? I can't work because they told me I was done. And he said, he said, well, Kim, it's not the worst thing that's happened to you. And I said, you're right. You're right. It's hard
right,
to quantify. And I think that in my case, the son, which was a sudden death in someone who was on top of the world and now gone, who we
right.
didn't have a clue. And as a mother, when someone has a suicide, there is guilt and shame and like, what did I not do?
Right.
This is part of my focus on building resilience in the next generation because I felt if I could have built resilience for him for a normal, a breakup with a girlfriend is something that's going to happen to all of us. It's a normal
Hmm.
life. Nobody's at fault. She
Hmm.
should break up with him if she didn't love him. I mean, that's a normal part of life. But he couldn't seem to manage that. And so
Hmm.
that's I took that as one of my goals for what I want to do now is help to build resilience in the
Yeah.
next generation. So
Yeah.
that was to me, that was the hardest thing. However, my husband, Jim, who had the liver transplant, right? And then he lived for about 10 more years. And every year in those 10 years, he had another medical emergency that was expected to result in his death.
Hmm.
So 10 times I was ready. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a widow. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be a widow. And then, of course, when he died, I thought, well, maybe he'll come. Well, actually, he did come back. Oh, that's another story. But he stopped breathing for 20 minutes and came back the day before he died. But it was like, oh my gosh, he's really gone now. What do I do? But I had time for him I had to kind of anticipatory grief, where I was
Right.
with the grief ahead of time. So when he died, my identity was different. I think that what you might be referring to,
Right.
you wake up, there's nobody there. You're alone. And it's a really deep aloneness because, he's not just on a trip. I'm alone for
Yeah.
good. And so that's what made it harder. But I was able to anticipate his grief and I think if you add all the grief up, it'd be pretty equal, but
Yeah.
it was different. It was a different grief. But yeah, it's hard. You really can't compare. And I think one thing I learned too, between the two of us when our son died, is you have to respect each other's grief because my grief, I didn't go into Eric's room for 3 years. I couldn't even breathe, when I walked past his door. Jim
Hmm.
was there every night. He was sitting in his room every night. We didn't change his room. It was there for 3 years. Jim sat there every night. I couldn't go by it. And
Right.
we had to just respect each other's wishes and not interfere. I knew how he felt, so I was very careful not to judge when he was in there or when he would play back tapes with Eric's voice on it, which would send me, down into the pit again.
Right.
And we just had to adjust to each other and respect each other and not blame each other and move forward together so that our marriage was and our family grew stronger. And many times families fall apart,
Hmm.
especially with the suicide. There's blame, there's shame, there's so many things that are involved. But we really focused on helping each other get through the experience together. And that was very important.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm testing out a new feature. I'd love to get your feedback on it. It's called Fan Mail, and you can send me a message right from the show notes of the podcast. So look for the link that says send me a text. You can ask a question for a future podcast. You can suggest a guest or just give me any feedback you want. Just remember, it is one way. I can't text you back, and I will not have your name, your email address, or your phone number unless you include it in the message. Let me know what you think. Wow. So many things I want to talk with you about. Suicide is a very, very important topic, and your mother's suicide and your son's suicide, very different things. And we try to understand, from our limited perspective, why does someone take their life? What were they thinking? And as you were, relating your story, I have a client. It was almost the exact same thing. His son was doing great, but he got in a fight with his girlfriend. I don't even sure it was an official breakup, and then he just went out and took his life like he jumped off a bridge, and as a parent, you're like, what? You made a permanent decision in a very, in that kind of a moment. So how long did it take you to come to the understanding you have now that this was an impulse? And how do you feel about it now?
it was very, very, very hard at first. And I'm a person of faith. And so my question, when my mother died, and she was a person of faith, there were no one would give her a funeral. She was the most godly woman I met because she committed suicide. This was
Mm,
years ago. However, when Eric died, we were Baptist, but he went to a Catholic school. And he wasn't at the Catholic school. He was at Columbia. He was away. He was at
mm,
college. Yet when we held that funeral, his old high school, where he wasn't even a student anymore, sent buses and buses of boys. It was a all boys Catholic military academy, so they had uniforms on. Buses of boys. It was there were thousands of people at that church,
mm,
and the Baptist honored Eric and talked about suicide as a disease. Every pastor was there. They were all crying because he was very involved in our church.
mhm,
That boys were there. And one of the best gifts I had was when we were taking Eric's casket and we addressed the boys. We addressed suicide at the funeral because I had these boys that were all crying, you know.
mhm,
And we were taking his casket, down the aisle of the church, uh, all of the boys, hundreds of boys, stood up in their military uniforms and saluted his casket. And again, I'm getting goosebumps because
mhm,
they were honoring his life. He made a difference in 19 years to so many people, and they were honoring his life. And so the hardest thing for me, as someone who believes in an afterlife and faith, is where's my son? Where's my son? Is he in heaven? Is he up there with you, God? And I, as a Christian, we kind of believe Jesus gave his life for us. So I said, well, okay, God, now I'm his mother. I didn't teach him resilience. It's my fault, because this is what you do when you're mom. It's my
right.
fault. So I'll tell you what, give me whatever place he's supposed to have. So if he's going down to wherever you go when you do this, I'll go there and give him my place and I'll live for you the rest of my life. I mean, you make these deals in your
Yeah,
head,
sure.
but I realized I was set when I call angels that just came around me. They were people.
Mhm,
There's no supernatural experience that I've had, darn it, but they're people that came just when I needed them, just when
mhm.
I needed them. In fact, I don't know if you know Tony Dungy, who was
Oh, yeah.
Tony Dungy's brother. Tony's brother, Lyndon Dungy, was a dentist down the street from us and a colleague. And we didn't know him that
Wow.
he was a colleague.
Uh-huh.
Tony lost his son to suicide under similar circumstances at about the same age after a breakup with a girlfriend. And so Lyndon just felt called to start writing us these beautiful letters that were just gorgeous. He's a person of faith as well. Beautiful letters. And we were getting these letters that he sent in the mail. And one day I was at the office, and it's hard to work when you're in grief, right? Because you don't, you're especially in it. Everybody knew Eric. They loved Eric. People were expressing I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And so every day I'd have 30 or 40 brand new people that I'd see. I'm so sorry. Which was wonderful that they did that, but it was very hard for me to, kind of, I'm
Right.
trying to get back to work. And then, so I was having a meltdown. As anyone knows who's had a loss, I was having a complete, utter meltdown in the hallway of my dental office. And I had two of my wonderful teammates or two hygienists that were there. And one of them had also lost her son to suicide after a breakup with a girlfriend. So I've had the, best people around me that comfort me, but I
Mhm,
was just absolutely overwhelmed with grief and crying and meltdown. And I was saying, where is he, Lord? Where is he? I went, where's my son? Where is he? Where is he? That's a huge thing for me that his afterlife is good, right? And at that moment, my office manager came in, said, Dr. Dungy just brought this over, a letter that was over. And he quoted a Romans quote that basically said, not angels or demons or anything else in this life will separate you from the love of God, which to me was like a direct, like, okay, Kim, he's with me, knock it off, get
yeah.
back to work. And I asked Lyndon, why did you suddenly deliver that? Because he just sent the other ones in the mail. He said he didn't know that. He said that morning he just felt that he had to write this letter and get it to me as soon as possible. And, so those types of things, those angels, I call them, and I
Yeah.
had many angels around me that were people. My
Mhm,
dental dentist that lost her son, his as well, ministered to me, helped
mhm,
me. And
mhm,
so what that did for me is help me realize that I think my job now, especially now that I'm alone, I got the time, I got no husband to take care of. My job is to minister to other people that have been through this and to let them know that joy is possible. So
mhm,
as you go through those things, and with my faith, I think that we have more of a purpose in life, and that our goal is like to go up to heaven and get a big high five from God that you did it. And and that gives me a lot of peace that I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, because what I'm doing and helping out, when you help other people, it comes back right at you. The joy that you give comes right back, even if whether they're receptive or not. It's just that you're giving it, it comes back. It's crazy. It's like a boomerang.
Yeah.
And so that I think that has been very helpful to me, my faith, the people around me, and then now my job is to help other people too.
Yeah. You mentioned that suicide is a disease, and we can all, I think, maybe relate to that because we can see people that struggle with it, that plan it, that are it's just like it just catches up with them, kind of like an addiction. But I was just wondering about, like, it's sometimes it just an impulse. I think, like in the case of your son. I mean, I don't think, and I don't mean to disagree with you, but I just want to get your perspective on that.
You're right, because when now we had another a nephew who also very bright nephew who was doing his doctorate dissertation in Japan.
Hmm.
This did somehow just made some mistake and ended up jumping off a large building and taking his life in Japan.
Mm.
That was about 3 years before Eric died, and that was the only time we saw Eric suffer from what we thought might have been depression. We got him help.
Sure. Yeah.
Otherwise, he was very, very active and very, just outgoing. But I think it is impulse control. He was very much like Robin Williams. He was really funny. He used to
Mm-hmm.
dig, and again, he's someone who also took his life. So I think that impulsive, the things that make you such a good jazz pianist or such a great
Right.
is that you just are impulsive and you just do what it feels like doing. And I think that that's probably what caused it. And and it's hard for the first few years. It's hard to see his peers that are growing up and getting families and so on.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I often think of, oh gosh, wouldn't it be great if he were here? But then I need to say, I need to put him where, I have him in my heart. I think of him every day, just as I do my husband, just as I do my mother, but I don't dwell. And so that's something I think that just for me is very helpful. I start I put that in my heart, and then I go find my grandchild or something, that kind of to bring me back. But I think
Yeah.
that's the healthy spot for him, and for my mother and for my husband are in my heart. And again, with my faith, I believe I'm going to see him again. So
Yeah. Now, you've mentioned your faith before, and you mentioned Catholicism. You mentioned being Baptist. Are you Baptist? Are you Catholic? What is your faith?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there. I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
I'm Christian, so I'm kind of a combination. In fact, I'm going down to
Okay.
Kansas City, and I go to a Baptist church now.
Hmm.
I really believe that your relationship with God, as you see God, is a personal one, you and God, and then the churches are very helpful in keeping you on track, reminding you what you need to do.
Hmm.
So I grew up Catholic. I married a Baptist, became Baptist. We were Methodists and Presbyterians for a while because we found good churches. And when I
Hmm.
go down to Kansas City, I'm looking at a Methodist church that I'm very interested in. So I'm just kind of, I call myself a Christian, and
Hmm.
I take the best of all those faiths because I think each of them have a little snippet of something wonderful, and I take those things and put it together. And I'm not critical. Churches are made up by men and women, human
Hmm.
beings, and so I kind of just try to focus on the guy upstairs
Yeah.
and authority. And so and it's kind of fun because I can go to any church and enjoy it.
It's interesting as we had that conversation or talk about that. I looked it up. This was many years ago. I think they were estimated it was 30,000 Christian denominations, and nobody knows what the real number is, but it's in the thousands. And there are minor differences in a lot of them. But one of the things some of them have in common is that suicide is like the ultimate sin, right? that it's the one you can't repent of. Did you ever have anybody come at you with that?
When my mother died, she was Catholic and involved in Catholic Church. Nobody actually said that to me, but
Right.
I was Catholic at the time, and so I kind of, it was kind of implied. I don't know if it was ever stated. I never saw it stated anywhere, but it was kind of implied. The interesting thing is with Eric, it was again those angels, those angels, those angels.
Mm,
One of the priests that were at his Catholic school, we made a donation and we just, happened to show up to drop off the donation. We're there for maybe 10 minutes. During that 10 minutes, this priest just kind of came out of the blue. He was no longer working. He was dying himself. He had oxygen on. He just happened to be there, happened to be there, right? Happened to be there. And he came up to me and he gave me this big hug and he said, it was one of the saddest moments of his life when he heard about Eric, the dancing bear, because that's what they called him. He was a drum major and he used to dance around on the top of
mm,
that drum thing. And he said, but I know that I'm going to see him pretty soon because he knew he was dying. And I'm going to give him a big hug for you. And again, I still get goosebumps. These are very emotional times for me because, again, here's a Catholic priest telling me that he's going to see my son in heaven. And the Catholics will donate a mass for people. So
mhm,
my son got mass after mass after mass that people were donating for him. My mother in the same church 35 years before got no mass.
mm,
So I think that change, I think we are changing and evolving. And
mhm,
so comforting because when I remember my mom, I remember standing in this, mortuary. It was dripping with shame. It was a dark room. I was 17 years old. It was dripping with shame
mhm,
for my mother, who was the most wonderful woman in my entire life. It was so hard for me. And yet when Eric's uh, death occurred, it was celebrated here. Columbia University had a memorial for him, and they planted a permanent memorial, shad bush, that still grows in front of the engineering center dedicated to him.
mm.
So, it was what's happening now is so good to help us recover. And all those little things like with that verse that showed up, when I was crying in the stairwell, to me, just tell me I know where he is. And that deal that I made with God, I'm going to be good because I get to go up there too, because I thought, well, I'm going to, if
Right.
true, I'm going down there, but I will do that for my son, because you'll
Right.
forget, right? Um, so I'm so glad that we're understanding this as a disease. And I was there myself. I mean, all my brother and sister and I all attempted to take our lives when we were younger. Fortunately, I didn't. I wasn't very good at it. But so I've been there. I've been in that place. And when you're in that place, it's just a place of pain. It's a place of emotional pain where you
Sure.
want the pain to stop. And you think you're a burden on everybody else. You think, oh, the world's
Right.
without me. So I understand the place, which I think helps me understand what they went through. And but for anyone that's contemplating it, please know that joy in life is possible. Don't think that where you're at right now is going to be where you're going to stay. Had I been successful as a teenager, I wouldn't have these six amazing little grandchildren that I'm just absolutely adore. Uh,
Mhm.
you just there's more to life and there's joy in life. It's possible, and I just want people to understand that.
Yeah, well, that's that resilience you talked about. And I always say that people need hope. And I think that when we get to that place when we don't have hope, that's when we're ready to give up. And you talked about the pit of that grief, that the zombie phase, and any of us who have been through that, we can relate to that, where you just no one can convince you that your life will ever be good again, that you will ever even smile again, let alone have a good day or look forward to anything. And having gone through that, once we go through it and we come out of it once, or at least move kind of forward, we realize when the next one happens, okay, I've kind of been in this place before. It's different, but it's similar.
Yeah. And I want my children, one of the things I'm doing with my book is I'm trying to kind of help some preventive grief. I'm helping my children understand when their pop died, it was so hard for all of us. And I saw my grandchildren suffering. And so I talked to them about their pop and we talked pop this, pop that. When I give Christmas gifts, it's from Nana and Angel Pop, so we keep
Right,
alive.
right,
I also tell them, one day I'm going to be gone. And I know that this works because my little grandchild, Heidi, was at the table the other day and she was looking up at me and she goes, Dana, if what happens to pop up happened to you? And I said, do you mean if I die? And she goes, yeah, Nana, if you die. She goes, I said, go ahead, Heidi, if I die, what? She goes, well, Nana, if you die, can we still go to Disney World? And I said, yes, I want you to be happy and joyful when I die. I want you to think of me with joy and I want you to thrive and flourish in your life. That would make Nana so happy because I think when people die, we feel like we don't have permission to be happy. We feel like we need to
Mhm.
mourn
Mhm.
and that we can't be happy. But if they loved us, they would want us to be happy. They don't want us in the grief pit. They want us out of there. The grief pit's a terrible place to live. It's
Yeah.
so much better to live in joy.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when I was in that grief pit, I thought the thing like, okay, one of the ways I'm going to honor my daughter is I'm never going to be the same again. People will say that he was never the same, and that way that I can show how much I love her. That's the kind of distorted thinking that we go through when we're in that place, and it's really good to have people like you who are saying, no, it's okay to move forward. In fact, it's more than okay. It's what our purpose is here. You're finding new purpose in life, and again, going back to we expect to lose a parent. That's the natural order, right? But not when you're 17. That's what's happened then. Um, we might lose a spouse. We don't expect to lose a child. But when we have a spouse, it's like you said, we're thinking, okay, after the kids are gone, blah, 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 then we're going to have our retirement. And we don't really think about the fact that one of us is going to go first. So that whole thing, I can only imagine what it's like to, like you said, you waking up by yourself, you're doing things by yourself, which you never planned to do.
Yeah, everything when you lose your spouse, you kind of make this plan for your life. You're going to plan to retire. Well, I completely failed retirement, obviously. You can plan to retire, that's your goal, right? And we built this beautiful cabin on a northern Minnesota lake that, up in the woods, and it's going to be our legacy to our children and our grandchildren. And this was our life. And
Mm,
Jim died. And so being up there by myself was not really that wonderful because the wonderful thing is sharing that time up there, right?
right.
And I found out that my kids really couldn't afford to keep, we built a home on a lake. It gets
Hmm.
expensive. And just to keep a property, even if it's paid off, just to keep it is expensive. The taxes are expensive. And
Right.
our kids didn't want it. And
Yeah.
wait a minute, this was our dream. We put everything into this dream to do this. And so there goes that dream. We had to go right into plan B. And so I ended up, what we ended up doing, it was getting too expensive for me as well as I sold the cabin. And then, what happens is it helps me to live, my retirement. But a completely different way. I would never, and I never knew I could write anything. But when you're in that grief pit, I mean, one thing about going through these things is you can probably write a little. I probably can write a little better than before because I have that internal knowledge, right, of
Sure.
suffering. But I mean, this is not, never in my wildest dreams would I think that I'd be sitting here talking to you on a podcast after writing a book and helping people, helping widows, go through their widowhood. I
Right.
never thought, of course, I didn't want to do the widow part because I didn't want to be a widow. So there, that's understandable, right?
Right.
But um, I think that being resilient means that when something comes up that puts a kibosh on the plans that you have, you redirect it to make the most of what you do have.
Hmm.
Look and appreciate what you do have in a way that you never did before. Because I look at my two daughters and say, oh my gosh, I've got these two daughters, they're alive. I'm so grateful for that. I mean, I never would have thought of that before. And I've got wonderful friends and I get up in the morning and I can still walk because, I got a new hip and I've got, because when you get older, things start falling apart. I'm
Hmm.
68, so I got a new hip. I got all kinds of new, aches and pains, but I'm still here. I'm still useful. And that gives me great joy. And I can live in joy instead of living in fear and living in grief.
Yeah. Well, I think that attitude of gratitude is like that's one of the keys to life. And people could look at you and say, okay, wow. It starts with being a thalidomide baby and losing your mother and this and all these bad things happen to you. Um, it reminds me of the story of Job. I think, in a sense, in the Bible, they're always like, what did you do wrong, Job? You obviously did something wrong. So have you ever like looked at God and gone, okay, why? How much?
Yeah, right. Oh yeah, many, many, many times. And I read through Job quite a bit, many, many, many times.
Right.
I remember that one time though that where there was a difference in that because I did, of course, like okay, haven't I had enough? Can't we spread this around a little bit? Because I really have had my share. I'm looking at my cup is overflowing with grief and suffering. And I remember the first time I could laugh at that was when I lost my job because that was my identity as a dentist. I mean, when you're a dentist, you're kind of in a nice place. Everyone treats you really well. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't have to even reach for your instruments. Someone puts them in your hand. I mean, they clean up after. I mean, it's wonderful. Um, and so now I can't do that anymore. So what use am I? What good am I? And I was going through that. I was feeling sorry for myself. I was after talking to my pastor when he said, "Well, it's not the worst thing that could happen to you." And when he said that to me, I kind of looked up in God and I said, "Really? Okay, we're going to have a talk. What the
Hmm.
heck?" What I found was, and I could find that connection. What I found was that was right before my husband really went downhill with his heart. He was working part-time, but then his heart started acting up and he ended up needing hospitalizations and he needed some help. And I was now home to take care of him. I wouldn't have been home to take care of him had I been working.
Mm.
So it almost as if God just said, okay, I kind of feel now that God has a plan for me. I've asked him many times to write it down so I could follow it, but he won't do that because he's God. He can do what he wants, right?
Right.
So I'm just trying to follow what his plan is, and I believe that this is what he wants me to do, which is why I get such joy in doing it.
Hmm.
I was up there like, really, God, are you kidding me? Now, come on, this is what the heck? But I was able to laugh at it at that time because I realized it wasn't the worst thing that could happen to me.
Yeah. And let's talk about, faith and religion, because we talked about how the church has, or I don't know if it's the church has even evolved. People, I think, have evolved. I think some of these doctrines that the church taught were, frankly, political. They were to keep people in fear, to keep people in control. So yeah, don't take your life because you're going to go to hell. Make sure you do confession, otherwise you're going to go to hell. You're going to have, and I think people's hearts have said, okay, that doesn't make any sense. So I think we're kind of rejecting those things. Um, so what are your thoughts on, like, when we're going to a church and they have a doctrine, how much attention do we pay to it? I mean, it's a struggle for, I think, for at least for me.
Well, for me, I somewhere along the line, and I don't know where, I just came to the feeling that it's me and God. It's you and
Mm,
God. It's
mm,
everyone and God. And I see the church as a very, very helpful community to come together to share most of the same faith. I mean, not everything, but most of it.
mm,
I don't pay attention to there's some things in the Catholic Church I didn't really agree with. There are some things in the Baptist Church I really don't agree with. And I'm sure when I go down to Kansas City, if I join that Methodist Church, there'll be some things there I don't really agree with. But to
mm,
make any difference as long as I'm honoring God. My job, I just focus on my job and I don't try to because he tells us not to judge. There's stuff in the Bible that says don't judge other people, right? So
right.
I try not to judge other people. I try to just live my life, me and God, me and God. But I love churches to give me a community of people, of believers who are believing the 90% of the same things that I believe in. And
Yeah.
I learned a lot of that when I was in Rwanda. We have 65 libraries in honor of my son in Rwanda, Eric Harms Memorial Libraries in Rwanda. And when I went to Rwanda the first time, I felt it was going to just be one or two libraries, and I kind of fell in love with the country. We just kept sending them. Um,
No.
and it was 16 years after the genocide when I first went, and they had this country that was completely destroyed. I mean, bodies in the streets, in the rivers, and all
Mhm.
the hospitals and organization of the country had been destroyed. Everything was a mess. They went from that, and in just 16 years, when I first went, they had built this country that was safe. It was one of the safest countries in Africa. It had a State Department level 1 safety rating, which is the same as Canada, and better than going some places in Europe that everybody goes to. So they turned this into this country, and the secret that they had, first of all, there are lots of different religious groups here. It's a mostly Christian country, but what I noticed, I was with a Catholic priest at the time. Their thoughts are as they try to bring people together, right? Because they had to learn we don't want to separate people out anymore. So as they bring people together, their philosophy was we all believe in it. If you believe in a God, you believe in the God, and we're all going to just support each other. We're not going to
Mm-hmm.
try to divide each other, which was amazing. And through the country as a whole, through forgiveness of the perpetrators and reconciliation, they worked at that. They worked at forgiveness. They worked at reconciliation because they wanted their country to be better off for their kids, and they accomplished that. It's an amazing place. I'd recommend anyone go there. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful place. But I learned a lot from them when I was down there, and I saw how. And I talked with this priest about how, oh yeah, we just all get along, and we just support each other. If you have a faith in a God, we just support you. And I really learned a lot of lessons. I think sometimes we think in the U.S., we have a little bit of superiority maybe in over some other countries. Well, we don't. Let me just tell you, go down
Yeah.
there, they're way ahead of us in the forgiveness and reconciliation. In fact, I think our entire legislature should just go down there and learn how to get along.
Right.
They know what can happen if you don't. And so they have really focused on that. But they helped me a lot to just have that feeling is it's me and my creator, and I'm gonna just live my life according to what I believe he wants me to do and
Mm-hmm.
help from community. I think those communities are important. I have a great community at my Baptist church. They went through Eric's funeral. They went through Jim's funeral. They know who I am. And my daughter has a great connection with her Catholic church, and the schools are great. So it's the community is the important thing from a church. That a church can give you a community. I don't think you necessarily have to believe everything they have in their doctrine. You can
Yeah.
go there.
That's such a great way of putting it, and it's as you were saying that I was getting like I'm not going to let the church come between me and God. It's there for the community, but I'm not going to let it. I'm not going to let the doctrines come between me and my Creator. Which is again, I grew up as Pentecostal. I grew up in the church. My grandfather was a pastor, and I've done a lot of studying about the Bible and stuff. And I realized there's a lot of politics in the church. There's a lot of control. There was a lot of and that's what people do. That's what men do. There's still some good things about it. I have a really good friend that he was an evangelical, and when he fell out with the church, he's like, okay, that's it. I'm done. I don't believe anything about the afterlife, nothing about spirituality. And it was really funny because I remember a couple of years later, he said, I miss the community. I really miss going to church on Sunday morning. And there's some atheists now, or at least this time they were trying to get together and have atheist church. It's like, you don't have to believe anything, but just get together and sing some songs and have community. Because I think that's really, really important. I think that might be the most important part about church. Um, I wanted to ask you about this because a lot of people that follow my program believe in soul planning. We believe that we plan our lives before we come in, and a lot of people push back on that. It was just someone that made a comment on one of my videos earlier, like, "Why would I plan cancer? Why would I plan some of the things that you've been through?" So, what are your thoughts on like, does God set up our lives? Is God responsible for what happens, or what are your thoughts on that? Because you've had quite a life.
One of the things that I find fascinating when I was writing my book, I started asking big groups when I was sitting at a big table, what do you think happens when you die? Just to get an idea what people are thinking. And the comments are fascinating and they're very different. They're very different from what I believe. And so I think that certainly I have a little talk with my pre-life planning self if I plan this life for me, because I really, I've got some issues with that.
Mm-hmm.
No, I just I feel to me that the creator of the universe or whatever, I believe it's God, I believe in Christ,
Mm-hmm.
that he loves me and there's a purpose in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I just try to live in that love. And the thing that I think that has been helping me to be at peace and with joy is I don't have to know all the answers. And somebody asked me one time, what would happen to you if a half an hour before you died, you realized that all that stuff you believed in was a bunch of bunk and you're just going to die and never, never. He was it was a very angry person that had just lost a child, so he was in a bad spot. And
Sure.
I said, wow, that's a great question. I said, you know what? I would just be happy that I was able to live my life in joy because I had a faith that says the joy of the Lord is your strength, and that
Uh-huh.
all things with what the heck does that mean when you're in the pit? Like, give me a break. but it's really true and you have to work for it. So the fact that I have a faith that tells me to search and for joy, and that joy is a goal and love is a goal,
Hmm.
I'm sticking with that.
Hmm.
And I'll be, I kind of think in the afterlife we'll be sitting around going, oh yeah, the Catholics are right about that, and the Baptists are, and these people are right about that. And that's just kind of how I look at it. I
Hmm.
don't know all the answers, but I do know that my belief now in a creator that loves me and that who sent Lyndon Dungeon over to send me that little phrase and some other things that have happened to me. I do believe, I feel that there's a presence of an ultimate God watching over me, even though I'm going to have a little talk when we get up there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't mind. It's okay for me not to know. It's okay for me to have my belief and have other people have their beliefs, and we'll
Hmm.
see how it works out when we get to the other side, or what, or nothingness, whatever that is. But
Yeah.
we'll just find that out, and having that gives me peace because I don't have to know. I think not having to know gives you peace.
Yeah, that is an interesting question, and the guy they asked you, and that comes from a place of anger. It's kind of funny because sometimes people will say, "I don't believe in God," but it's like obviously you do because you're mad at him. You
Mad
say,
at
"I'm so mad, I'm going to pretend that you don't exist." It's like a toddler that pretends their parents not standing there. I think that reaction to me is always really interesting. But what I've gotten from talking to you, Kim, this morning is that just from when you first came on, I could feel the joy in your life, and it's a matter of, and you said it many times, it's a choice. We can choose how we look at our lives, and all of our lives are a mixed bag. We all hit those roadblocks. That's I say it's a feature. It's not a bug. It's the way this world is designed, and I think it's because so we can learn and so we can grow, and we have a choice. And I mean, you could say I started off when I was really young and I was born with this and my mother and this, or you could say like you just told me, I'm going to be splitting my time between Minnesota and Kansas City, so I can spend time with my grandchildren. I've got these two lovely daughters, and having your son transition gives you more of an appreciation for the children that you have here because you know how precious that is.
and then it can be taken away at any time, which
Yeah.
is hard thing to learn. But if you know something can be taken away, I think you value it more.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we get older and things do get taken away from us, it's like we realize being able to walk is a cool thing because when you have to have a hip replacement, my wife had two knee replacements, and she really appreciates being able to walk again. Most of us take that for granted, or a lot of us do. We hopefully learn not to.
Yes, my husband was the 12th of 14 children, and I was 7 years younger than him.
Oh
And
wow.
his older sisters are in their, getting into 90s and late 80s and so on. And so I'm able to see as I progress through my life with them. I'm the only one that can drive at night now, so I'm very valuable in the family. But as I progress through them, I'm realizing these are things to look forward to. So don't take the fact that you can walk for granted. Don't take the fact that you could do these things. I live independently. Don't take that for granted.
Hmm.
Be grateful that you can still do it. And again, none of them can drive at night anymore. So I'm going to take advantage of the fact I can still drive at night. So
Yeah.
it's kind of it's as you age and you go through. I think one of the nice things about having this view of an afterlife, and this is just part of the plan, is helpful because you feel like you're just progressing through this schooling in life, and you're not going to be gone. Sylvia, who's in her 90s, she's graduating for this schooling, and she's not going to be gone. We just lost one past year. She's
Hmm.
That's helpful for me in having that joy and feeling that what I want to do now is make the most of the time I have here. I have
Hmm.
limited time. I know I'm in the fourth quarter. Make the most of the time so that the ones that I love will have an easier time progressing as they go through.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful way of looking at it. Well, we've touched a little bit on your books. Let's talk about a little bit more about what people are going to find in your books.
Well, the Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For is the first part of the book talks about lots and lots of legacies you can leave. You can leave thousands of legacies, but like kindness and hard work and hope and faith, there's so many legacies you can leave behind to help your family get through life. And it explores a number of people, a Holocaust survivor, a lot of talk about Rwandans that I know, and
Hmm.
just regular people that have left a legacy of love and joy. You don't have to win an Academy Award. You just have to love people. That's all you need. So that's first part of the book talks about that. The second part talks about facing your death and dying, what people feel about death and dying. Are you going to go to heaven? Are you going to go somewhere else? Are you just going to be gone? So it explores death and dying with some humor, because we need to just not have a little humor about it so that you'll go through it. Then the last part is a workbook, because in order to leave your children solid and ready for the future, you got to do some work. You got to get all your will and your estate planning, all that kind of stuff done. And so I talk about all the things that need to be done, healthcare directive, all those things.
Mm-hmm.
But I also focus on the emotional stability of your family. And so I talk about leaving that great legacy of love. And the most famous love letter of all time was written by St. Valentine to be delivered after he died.
Mm-hmm.
So I recommend leaving Valentines for your children and having them in your little legacy folder. So as they're going through after you die, they go through your folder after you die and they say, "Oh, mom loved me because she got all this stuff together. I don't have to search through her drawers." But then just in case they don't get that part, they'll see a love letter that tells them exactly how much you love them, how proud you are of them, because there's just some things you don't want to leave to chance. So I just really recommend giving your legacy, building your legacy with a focus on providing resilience and emotional security and lack of conflict, because 57% of Americans report conflict around a death.
Yeah.
You don't want conflict around your death. So leave them in good shape so there's no conflict. They're ready for it. And then when you're up there in heaven or wherever you go, they're going to be down here and they're going to be stable on earth. You're not going to make their life worse because you lived. You're going to make your life better because you lived.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're doing a fantastic work. So I know I'm sure your kids are proud of you, including your son Eric, and everybody around you. You're just doing great work. So I appreciate that. So if people want to reach out to you after listening to this, is there a way that they can reach you?
Yes, they can just go to my website, which is drkimberlyharms.com. And I'm going to be developing a course to go along with the book. It should be coming out in about a week, so that if the book isn't enough to help you get ready and you need a little more motivation and maybe you're a little procrastinator, you can go through a little online course that'll just help walk you through the steps so that you leave a great legacy for your family, and they are emotionally more stable and they know you loved them after you're gone.
Awesome. Anything that you'd like to say? Anything I forgot to ask you, or any last words you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I know you're talking about grief, and again, I've spent many years in the grief pit. I really would just like to encourage anyone who's there right now to understand that getting out of that pit is a wonderful experience for you and everyone around you. And it's hard. It's not easy. It's hard. But I just want to urge you and encourage you to fight and kick and scream and claw your way out of that pit for yourself and for all the people around you. And I just want to give them all a hug, because, I've been there in that pit.
Yeah, Kim, thanks for being so open. Thanks for being so caring and sharing. And have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Hey there, if you like this episode, come on over and talk about it. Let me know what you liked. If you didn't like this episode, come on over and talk about it. Let me know what you didn't like. Go to grieftogrowth.com/community and look for Talk About the Podcast. I'll see you there.